Hey, what's going on, everyone? Excited to bring to you Ryan Hall, who's one of the co-authors of Redefining Masculinity that we just launched. And stay tuned, we're launching the paperback pretty soon. Ryan is an author, podcaster, and life coach for kings. As a coach, he's committed to supporting men to getting their hearts and be kings, the heart-centered leaders of the world. And he's a storyteller, a podcaster, and he's committed to sharing stories of power, redemption, resilience, and heart. Welcome to episode 110.
110 episodes. Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
thank
been
well,
fun.
thank you so much for inviting me back on. I mean, I'm excited to be back on with you on the Davidson podcast.
Yeah. So just reread your chapter. It's always good. And I was really present to the vulnerability and the last page definitely resonated with me when you owned your truth and it's someone clearly you've done a lot of healing work, right?
Yeah.
That was very evident in your last page of your chapter.
No, definitely. I mean, just there's a lot that we can really unpack from that, I believe, but
Yeah.
the thing that yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There has been a lot of inner work, a lot of healing work that I've put in to how I see my own masculinity, how I see my own manhood. And once you read my chapter in this book, I think you'll see why.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being open about some of the family, what one of your cousins said or one of your relatives said, right? I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, no one wants to hear that, right? I mean, it's interesting, right? I feel like hurt people hurt, right, is sort of like the thing that I've learned from my time just reflecting on like the bullies that I've had and sort of like some of the people that like really triggered me in my life. And it's taken me a while, but now I feel like I have a little bit more compassion. Well, who knows like what they've gone through, right? That doesn't make it okay,
Of
right?
course.
It's never okay to bully someone, but at least you can kind of we can kind of like understand like okay, like something, like no baby is born like that, right? It's something happened at some point.
Yeah, totally, totally. You're not born seeing somebody for just their outer shell. I
Hmm.
mean, there's a, there's there's this picture that is just that went like went viral again this past summer. Back when a lot of the George Floyd protests were going on, a lot of the like anti-Confederate stuff was going on back last summer.
Yeah.
But it's these two babies sitting on a bus, one black, one white, and they're reaching out to hold hands while
Hmm.
one of them's parents, they're just looking completely the other way.
Hmm.
And you're never born hating somebody for the color of their skin or for how they look or anything like that. It's all of a it's all a it it's all a conditioning through a lot of factors.
Yeah.
It's all a conditioning, I believe, through a lot of factors, and those factors, can really hurt somebody. Can really
Yeah.
hurt somebody if if they don't know how to, if they don't know how to combat that, or if they don't know how um to deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, it's it's interesting, right? I think a lot of us that get into this coaching work, we've experienced like some sort of like traumatic events or some sort of adversity, right? It's fair to say like most healers don't go into this work just I see the common theme amongst like even all the the participants that graduated from accomplishment coaching with us, right? Like you can see like, okay, well, if XYZ didn't happen, then I don't think I'd be into this men's work as much, or
Yeah.
into healing others. um was there like a specific moment even recently? Because I do think the work never ends, right? I think every day we're still doing it, and we're never truly like 100% transformed, right? It's always like layers and layers.
Yeah, the only finish line for that is the grave.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, yes, there was something that I wrote about in my chapter in Redefining Masculinity, but maybe, you know, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, something like that. Part of my day job, I work at a Best Buy in Norwalk, Connecticut, as the Google Chromebooks sales specialist. And I'm not a Best Buy employee, but everybody there knows me. And I was standing at my Google Chromebooks counter, which just happens to be right beside the printer aisle. And this old man comes by, headed to the printer aisle, pokes my belly, and asks me when the baby is due.
Yeah.
And after that happened, now I'm almost 44 years old. I have done a lot of healing work. But at
Mm,
that moment, I felt like I was 12 years old again. I felt like I was, back on the playground or back in that
mm,
classroom taking abuse from bullies again. And man, I was seeing red. So you're absolutely right. This transformation work never ends. This transformative work never ends because there's always going to be something that triggers you. But, and here's the punchline of this. If there is I guess, if there is a silver lining in this, is that who I am now, I was able to see what was going on for what it was, for just an abusive old bully, right? I was able to see what was going on instead of
mm,
taking it intensely personally,
mm.
like I might when I was 12, 13 years old, back in the same time period that I wrote about in my chapter.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like it doesn't affect us as deep or as long, right? Like you can recover from those quick hits. Like it's like, yes, it's like getting punched in the gut. But I used to be out for weeks, months, or even years, right? For some of these, where like now when these moments happen, it would be just like a day or a few hours, right? It doesn't paralyze me for like a whole month, you know. I think that's what I've realized from doing this work.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Like with this situation I'm talking about, I was yeah, it knocked me out for, maybe a day.
Yeah.
Um but the the funny thing is that the old guy came back maybe a day or two later, and like my I felt my entire body tense up.
Mm,
I felt like my entire being, my entire body tense up. The analogy that I like to use is that of a guitar string. Like
mm,
I felt like that guitar string that was just about ready to snap.
mm,
But I remembered just so much of the work that I've done over
mm.
these long and many years to get past something like this. And you're never really past it, like you said, you're never really past it, but the the knockout isn't quite as long. Like the period of time isn't nearly as long. I think is my biggest lesson from that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting, right? It's I try to think back to like moments where people have been, not so kind to me, and now I try to have compassion, like, hey, like what could have happened in their lives that they have to take it out on someone like me,
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, that's like the transform way. Looking at every day is certainly not like that every day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And not everybody is going to have that luxury of being able to see it from that, from that filter.
Yeah, yeah. I think it definitely takes a lot of Tony Robbins, a lot of a lot of landmark, a lot many hours of thinking about this. Yeah, it's interesting because I do think in the world of especially now in the pandemic, it's like we're even more easily triggered, right? Because we're just stuck with ourselves a lot more, so we can't really run away from whatever it is that we've been running away from, right? Whether it's through video games or through for me, like watching some Netflix, like stuff like that, like or like just I love eating ice cream, right?
Right.
Like I think being by myself or being with myself it's been exactly a year now. Like I'm like, wow, like I tend to spend money when I'm sad or when I'm depressed, right? It's like we all have these things that we tend to do, when things aren't going our way, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. There's part of the training that you and I both had in our accomplishment coaching. There was there's a conversation where one of the questions is something like, what's one what's one thing that what's one go-to thing that you have when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling down, that you do to instantly feel better?
Mhm.
And for me, it's food. For me, it's food. For other people, it might be, it might be alcohol, it might be drugs, it might be promiscuous sex, it might
Mhm.
be, but it's something to something to take your mind off of the battles, off of the, like the, just the total wrestling match
Mhm.
that goes on in many of our heads.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and many of us don't have the awareness of what that is even sometimes, right? Or sometimes we do, and then I think, and like with anything, it's okay, moderation, right?
Sure.
Like for me, I think I have like all of the above, right? Like I go through stages where it's like alcohol, like drugs, even women, right? Earlier in my life. I think some of us do whatever it is to crave attention, right? To get attention, just like look at me, like what about me, So I think it is, this pandemic has helped us really kind of be a little bit more curious about what it is that we are running away from, you know?
Yeah, and if we don't have that perspective of knowing that there's something outside of all of us that, that's controlling us, that's keeping score, so to speak, that we don't have the kind of perspective of therapy, of coaching, of transformation work that, that you and I have both dedicated our lives to over many years. A lot of us that don't have that turn to these other things, and it can be a problem. It really can.
Yeah. I feel like even success, right? You can get addicted to like success or fame or um attention, right? Like I think, I was speaking to my therapist the other day, and or my psychologist, and I was like, "Oh, I think I'm addicted to like success." And he's like, "Oh, that's not like a bad addiction." I'm like, "I beg to differ." Like it can very much well be.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, there was
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny you should say that. I had a one of my favorite interviews on my podcast was with a guy named Tommy Breedlove. And Tommy Breedlove, he's a like more of a corporate men's coach down in the Atlanta area. But when he was a younger man, he was just immensely successful in finance and in, and like financial management, made a ton of money. Driving nice cars, living in a nice place, and just found himself completely empty and angry and just pissed off at the world.
Mm,
And he knew that there was something more out there. So yeah, we can get addicted to success. We can get addicted to the money, to the fame, to whatever, to the things. But it's, I believe, a symptom of what does that do to us instead of what does it do for us.
mm. Yeah, and I love what you said about like how you want to be like a sportscaster, and how you were able to own your own charisma, right? How you were able to like really discover like your charm and the way you carry yourself in the room and just your contributions, right? It might not look like winning the Heisman Trophy, but you impact so many people in so many different ways, like beyond so it's just interesting to see which ways to kind of reflect on how we impact the world beyond like the more traditional ways of what people view men as like for entertainment purposes.
Yeah, totally, totally. And there's also in what you just said, there's also what I tried to put across in my chapter is there is a cultural aspect of that to me. I mean,
Yeah.
growing up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, what's one thing that anybody thinks of when it comes to Tuscaloosa, Alabama? It's Crimson Tide football, right? Even
Yeah.
though Bama basketball is killing it this year, it's Crimson Tide football. It's Bear Bryant. It's Nick Saban. It's, Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, the guys who are, making millions of dollars tearing up the National Football League. And there is that's like the height of masculinity
Mhm.
in, in the deep south, and not just in Tuscaloosa, but in most, big time college football towns. I mean, go to Auburn and they still worship Bo Jackson. Go to Georgia and it's Herschel Walker and,
Mhm.
stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
It's those types of just iconic godlike figures. This is like the height of masculinity.
Hmm.
And it's like I said in my chapter, you're not going to sell out a 100,000 seat stadium to watch somebody read from a manuscript.
Right, right.
It's going to be, you're going to be watching a rival football game. That's what sells out the stadiums. That's what has your, national TV on a Saturday night in October.
Hmm.
And, but there are way more ways to be a man, to be masculine, than just be, a star football player or,
Yeah.
or a star football coach. There's, there's probably 5 billion men in the world. There's 5 different million different ways to be a man.
Hmm. Yeah, like what you're saying about it doesn't have to look away. And it's one of my teammates, or Beth, like when we did the program together, she's like, I love how you're starting the new masculinity, right? Like you just being comfortable crying in front of us and just opening and bearing your heart. Like it's like that's beautiful, like you're making it possible for everyone else that it's okay. So I do like what you're saying about how it doesn't have to look a certain way. And um I do think in today's age, like there's definitely more layers to it, right? It's I feel like the media tends to portray just like the archetype, right? But Yeah, it's interesting. I'm starting to see a shift, but we're definitely
There's still a long ways to go.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a long ways to go, but I'm really, it's funny you should mention that. Like one of my, and this was really before I started getting into coaching and really kind of digging into my um, like personal development work.
Mhm.
One of my self-deprecating jokes was that I always thought that my life would be a lot easier if I looked like Ryan Reynolds instead of Ryan Hall.
I'm not, yeah.
But there, you know, I mean, I'm not 6'5" and, ripped out of granite like he is. I am who I am.
Right.
I
Owning.
am, I am who I am. I have my own charm. I have my own charisma. I have my own, magnetic personality
Yeah.
that people are drawn to, you know?
Yeah, I love that you own it, right? Because I think many of us, it seems like what I've seen, men or in general, people don't own it until they're like in their 60s or 70s, right? I feel like I see some old folks like they're just totally comfortable in their skin, right? Like I feel like that's so rare though, like people just able to accept who we are, like perfect as is.
Yeah.
That's a rarity in today's age.
But if you think about it like this, one of the biggest sex symbols for men in the past 20 years probably was James Gandolfini, the late James Gandolfini.
Mm,
Overweight, balding, but people, women were just drawn to this guy. I mean,
yeah.
to say nothing of just being a brilliant actor and brilliant at what he did, women were just drawn to this guy like like flies to honey. And and he died, what was it, 2013, 2014, something like that.
Yeah.
So there's just, there's
Mm,
it's like you said, the shift is starting, but there's
yeah.
still a long ways to go. There is still a long ways to go, and I think that's why this book is so important, and that's why I was so into it when you told me about this idea.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on what you said, so your story kind of reminded me. There was a guy in college. I was a part of an Asian fraternity, of course, and there was a guy.
You? No kidding.
There's a guy named Cho who it was funny because he would openly say he's like, "Hey, I'm not the best looking dude, and I'm not the skinniest or the buff dude." But he owned himself. Like he was funny as heck. Like, but all the women were so attracted to him. He would have like the hottest women like flock towards him because he just owned who he was. Like he was hilarious. Like he would make them laugh. Like he just always said the wittiest things, right? But he was honest about it. He's like, "Hey, I know I'm not the best looking, but." He was just so confident, and I respected the hell out of him because there was another guy. I'm not gonna say his name because that's mean, but there was another guy who was like ripped, like he was gorgeous, right? But he was very awkward around women. Like he had the opposite problem where he like everyone's like once he starts talking, like it just goes downhill. But if you just were to just be next to him, you're just like, oh my God, like you're just like your body is like heaven.
Oh, totally.
um
Yeah.
but yeah, it was just funny how like you meet people like that and you're just like, huh, like it's interesting.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, there's more than one way of how to look at manhood.
Hmm.
There's more than one way at how to look at masculinity. And
Yeah.
I there was a like I'm not going to say his name, but there was this guy back, back home in Alabama. There was this guy that um belonged to the same gym that I used to go to, and he kind of suffered from that meathead complex. Good looking guy, fit, good looking body, but he kind of had that meathead thing going on. And I remember I was on the leg press machine, and admittedly I could move some weight. I mean, granted, I haven't been in a gym in over a year because, you know, COVID, but and I definitely want to get back. But especially 15 years ago, I could certainly move some weight. And I remember looking up and seeing this kid walking to the water fountain. And I kid you not, Davidson, he kissed both of his biceps.
Uh-huh.
And I cringed when I saw that. I absolutely cringed when I saw that. But he always he always had the stereotypical hottie on his arm.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But if you look at these people, it's not what I want. You know what I mean? It's not what
Yeah.
I want. They open their mouth and they sound just completely just not what I want. I'm trying to
Right.
be really nice here.
Yeah.
but but just because just because you have that kind of confidence, just because you have that kind of look about you,
Hmm.
that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean anything. It's all about the total package. It's all about the total package.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I'm reading a lot of books about this topic, masculinity, and even just reflecting upon like the people that I know, right? Being in Manhattan, you know, being in business, like you come across people that are, let's just say, like their goal in life is to like try to get with as many women or sleep with as many women as possible, right? But then you start to dig deeper and you start to really see that like what void are they trying to fill, right? Because sometimes I'm just curious, like I'm like but I do think like just upon reflection and upon just like kind of being in that crowd, because even in college at some point like in my life I was like, huh, like what, like why was I so interested in the opposite sex, right? Like that's all I
Sure.
cared about when I was like 20, 21. And I think for me it was that I was trying to overcompensate, or I was trying to like make up for the fact that like I didn't have a father, right? So I'm like, oh well, maybe if I have like a person of the opposite sex, it'll feel like that innate desire for love, right? But then I realized like, oh, if I don't love myself, it doesn't matter how many women I have, like nothing will ever fill that, like that heart can only be filled by my own love, right? But so I definitely noticed like, when we try to overcompensate or we try to fill things with other things, like we should probably take a look at like, what's the driver, what's motivating all of these like actions.
Yeah, totally. And if you think about it like that, there's I think there's a lot out there that can really, that's like really a factor at that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the media is a prime driver of that,
Mm-hmm.
because how many books, how many plays, how many movies have been written about that, like that that Don Juan type.
Right. Yeah.
But even then, Don Juan is a tragic figure. Even in the, even in that ain't the old play, Don Juan is a tragic figure,
Uh-huh.
because there's something outside of himself that he's trying to fulfill with the women, with the, with the opulent parties and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And a great example of this, it just flashed on me, is 007.
Mm-hmm.
Now 007, you know, how many just iconic actresses have been Bond girls?
Mm.
I always feel like 007, it, you know, maybe with the exception of the last few movies, the Daniel Craig 007, but I've often felt like the girls were something to stroke his ego,
Mm.
because he was doing dangerous work. He was killing people. He was,
Mm.
he was, in like car chases and whatnot.
Yeah.
That it was almost like trying to bring him back down
Mm.
and center him so he could continue doing his work.
Mm. Yeah, it's it's interesting. I think only more recently on Netflix I've seen like these need I feel like there's a new generation of content that is definitely changing some of these narratives. But that's more recently. I think if you look at the last I mean pretty much everything before that, right? It like you said, there's certain like archetypes and it's it's like they always cast like a Ryan Reynolds type of person, right? Or Brad Pitt or something like that, right?
Sure.
um Even reading Matthew McConaughey's biography, like you can kind of tell like okay, because of his good looks, like he's had it pretty easy. Like he from the
Yeah.
get, he was like, yeah, my life is different. Where people talk about how much they struggled, but he's like, from the first movie, I became famous, and it's like, yeah, if I look like that, I mean, it would probably be easier for me to get a job too.
But on the other hand, yeah, one of the best looking men in the world, one of the best looking, men in Hollywood history.
Yeah,
But he's also a deep guy.
yeah, he really
He's
is.
also a deep guy. I mean, you're reading
Yeah,
his book. I haven't started yet, but
so
it's
good.
he's in that's in my Audible queue.
Yeah,
But he's a deep guy,
yeah, yeah,
and I think that is why somebody like him, he's had the longevity that he has had.
yeah,
I mean, even Brad Pitt. I mean, Brad Pitt's no dummy.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you talk to him, Brad Pitt's no dummy. Um, I mean, you've got to have some kind of, um, you've got to have some kind of substance in order to last
Hmm.
out there.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Matthew's book is extremely thought provoking, right? Not something I would expect. Not really knowing him at all, right? Like
Sure.
obviously, but yeah, it is interesting to see like the depth of a lot of like the more recent novels or biographies with a lot of these men. I think it's becoming more accepted as men trying to trailblaze and kind of share a lot of these like more darker and more philosophical things. So it's pretty cool. Like I definitely I'm starting to see something change. Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. And again, I think that's why this that books like Redefining Masculinity need to have a wider audience.
Yeah. Oh, and I know you're working on a new project, right? Would you be willing to share with us what that it's about?
I would love to. I am partnering with our mutual dear friend, the lovely Elizabeth Hill, on a new project that I hope to be the first in a series of what I'm calling the Solar Powered Chronicles of
Mm.
stories, of just transformational stories of people who have found purpose through, through whatever circumstances that have been in their lives. And the first one that I am that 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 we're looking to launch this coming October is called From Tragedy to Triumph.
Mm.
When people have found their own soul-led missions
Mm.
from from heartbreak, from getting their feet completely taken out from under them.
Mhm.
And honestly, I'm a perfect example of somebody who was found that, because I was led to coaching and transformational work right after I lost my father. And I'm not going to go into incredible detail, but there is a story that I want to share in this particular book about how the relationship between my dad and a Fender Rhodes piano helped me find my voice and to be able to find my mission to help people create their voice and share their message with the world.
Mhm. That's awesome, Ryan. Yeah, you just doing your thing, being a connector, transforming the way that you know how to, right? Through thoughtful discussions, through um, writing and sharing vulnerably from your heart, and just being connection and love, and just being space and possibility. Yeah, man, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Can't wait to see your chronicles, and hopefully be able to contribute a few things along the way in your chronicles. And yeah, thank you so much for your contributions to redefining masculinity from a place of being, and from a place of support and consistency, and clearly commitment. You're definitely committed to the cause. It's awesome to partner with you on that.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's a message that I believe very deeply in. It's a message that I have a lot of passion behind, and I think that and to be included with some of the other men that are in this book, it's truly special to be a part of something like this. And again, I truly believe that a book like this really needs a wider audience and to be in as many hands and as many readers as
Mm.
possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again. Oh, and how can people follow you? And I'll include all the links, but what's the best way to reach you usually?
Certainly. My website is royalheartscoaching.com. And on that website, there is a link to where you can go and sign up to be a possible author for From Tragedy to Triumph. We're recording this podcast in early March, but we're going to be accepting applications through the end of April, which is a little while off, but get those applications in now. You can also follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Ryan Hall Writes. Or as I say in my podcast, you can shoot me a good old fashioned email at ryan@royalheartscoaching.com.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much for having me.